So it's my pleasure at this time to introduce Dr. William Beardslee. Well, Katie is a younger professional who's just starting to build an evidence base, and we can just see how challenging that is. Dr. Beardslee is a pioneer in this field. And something some of you may not know about him is that one of his early writings was about civil rights workers in the southern United States. He wrote a book about that. And I think that picks up that theme of resilience that may have been throughout your lifetime, Dr. Beardslee, and then led to his development of a piece of work that has become an evidence-based practice, and he's done the hard slogging to do that. And you can see from the work that Katie's doing just how much is involved in that whole process. So Dr. Beardslee, as a pioneer in this field, has been really teaching us about breaking down the barriers and helping parents talk about mental illness to their own children and to empower that. So it's my pleasure. Dr. Beardslee is also from Boston, and he is the Gardner Monk Professor of Child Psychiatry at Harvard University. Dr. Beardslee.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and it's great to appear on this podium with Katie and that terrific presentation. I'm honored to be here. I've participated in a number of these conferences, although my first involvement came in a related conference, the first conference at the Carter Center, bringing together the Carter Mental Health Task Force and the World Health Organization mental health component in 2000. And in that year, groups from Holland, Finland, and the United States decided to collaborate together. Clemens Hausmans, Karen van Dusen, Tuki Salantas, and myself. And we went forward from there and have developed a wonderful collaboration that continues and has then involved people in many other countries, certainly Norway, Sweden, Canada, Australia. I'm very proud to be part of this organization. I was at the original COMPI meeting in Adelaide in 2009. I was at the meeting, I wasn't at the meeting in Oslo because we had a meeting of the World Health Organization the next week in Boston where all the same people were, but I was at the meeting led by Rob Lees in Vancouver in 2012, and I'm very glad to be here. I think it's remarkable the progress that's been made and the potential that we have. I think the central issue is implementation and dissemination. In a democracy, if we really believe in democracy, then we have to believe that we need to offer the best treatment to everyone in the same way that we offer the best civil rights and human rights to everyone. And I believe mental health care, access to mental health care is a basic human right and a basic civil right. We need to be able to offer the best quality treatments. That means we need to be able to implement and disseminate interventions widely while sensitively adapting them. And I think that the internet and Facebook and Twitter, although I'm not a devotee of those yet, offer tremendous opportunities for doing that. Katie's illustrated some of those. And I would also say it's an interesting time. Rob mentioned that I worked in the civil rights movement. I went back and wrote a book about how the civil rights workers sustained themselves. They said really four things. They were activists and doers very much, registering voters, running for office, risking their lives, obviously, not overwhelmed by the terribleness of the racism, but being able to be very angry about it and keep working. Secondly, they were very committed to relationships, tremendously interpersonally connected. And thirdly, they had a very good sense of their identities, of who they were, why they were there, their self-understanding. And that resilience, those observations have guided all of my work since, and certainly when we looked at resilience in the children of depressed parents as we were building interventions, that happened as well. Now, I have to say we've had a lot of anniversaries in my country. Last year we celebrated the anniversary of the March on Washington. Again, 50 years, and much progress has been made, a lot to be made. We celebrated the anniversary of the passage of the Community Mental Health Act, which really began a large-scale effort in community mental health in this country. This year we've had the anniversary of the War on Poverty, and Also last year, we celebrated the anniversary of the founding of the National Academy of Sciences, which was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln in the spring of 1863, before the great battles of Vicksburg and Gettysburg turned the tide and preserved the Union. The Institute of Medicine's explicit, and the National Academy of Sciences' explicit purpose is that science should serve the public interest. And I've had the privilege of working in that area, worked for the IOM and other things. And finally, I'm from Boston. And last Monday, we had the running of the marathon, which went, thank God, very well. But it was also the anniversary of the terrorist attack in Boston, the terrorist bombings in the marathon the previous year. And again, there is tremendous resilience in Boston and tremendous resilience in the people of Boston. We were able to see that in that event, but much more in the events day to day, week to week, as people cope with both the physical trauma and the emotional trauma and are coming out on the other side. So I think the message is people can become resilient in the face of stresses. And then I would also say that many of you are younger than I. I wouldn't describe myself as old, but as mature. I hope to keep working for 20 more years at least. But I do remember with great pride in 1988 buying my first computer, a Mac, being able to take it out of the box, follow the instructions, and get it to work. Okay, now 1988 was not that long ago. But think about the range of technologies, Twitter, Facebook, any number of things on the internet. But think about also the challenge that that presents. If I'm an adolescent on the internet and I get bored with something, I can switch to 60 other different things. Music, video, food, Facebook. In other words, the thing about the internet, like everything else, is it's not simple. We need to study it. We need to figure out how to use it and how to figure it out. And I would say, and Katie and I have come to many of the similar conclusions, but I would go back to a piece of data. And the piece of data is, we know that cognitive behavior therapy for depression works. If we then look at internet therapies for depression, what we find is that if we pair the internet therapies for depression with some face-to-face connections with the therapist, we have about the same outcomes as full face-to-face. But if we do just internet, we don't have as good outcomes. So I think the question is, what combination of face-to-face and internet is what we need to really maximize yield, to maximize strengthening families? I think a very different question is we think about, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm battling to try to get family-centered care all the time, but all the models in psychiatry are individually centered. That is, their diagnosis, their medication, etc. And unfortunately, much of the internet is also individually focused. People tend to sit at the computer and work. So how do we think about families and internet? So those are the kinds of things I've been wrestling with. And so again, I would say that we need to think very carefully about the kinds of research we do. We've moved our field from sort of people meaning to do well, and that's the core and essential, to people meaning to do well and having some idea of what works and what doesn't, through study, through understanding risk, through understanding resilience, through doing trials, and through doing adaptations. And we need to think in the same way about rigors of research in the internet. So I'll go, since I'm a doctor, there's been a lot of concern about disclosure and conflict of interest. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. I receive funding for various research projects. I consult the government entities. I'm on the board of several nonprofits, including the board of the Public Policy Committee of Mental Health America, Families for Depression Awareness, Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, and the Rosa Parks Mental Health Task Force. Project Focus is a Navy project that I've been with since its inception. And much of the work that I'll talk about has come out of both my own team and my work with the Institute of Medicine on two major reports, one on prevention, the other on parental depression. They came out in 2009. They're available for free online at nap.edu, which is National Academies Press.edu. And just to talk about the core concepts of prevention and family talk for a minute before I get to the internet. I think as we think about prevention, requires a paradigm shift. Mental health and physical health are inseparable. Successful prevention is inherently interdisciplinary. It's inherently family-focused. Mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders are developmental. We know that. We need to think about where to position interventions across the span of development to maximize their effects, and coordinated community-level systems are needed to support young people. That runs throughout all we know. And again, a developmental perspective is key. If we go, this is the most famous diagram from the IOM, and across the top, stages of development, and then what kinds of interventions seem to have large effects. Pregnancy prevention, prenatal care, high-risk families, home visiting, although in many European countries, home visiting is not for high-risk families, it's for all families. In the same way, in this country, we've got lots of data about home visiting and early intervention in high-risk families. In lots of European countries, center-based care is available to everyone. It makes a large difference, probably in Canada as well. So that it's not just that these interventions are good for high-risk families, it's that that's where the data comes from. But as we think about then moving across the span of childhood, there's an extremely strong evidence base about parent skills training. Probably the most robust thing we have. There's lots of evidence about social and behavioral skills training. Then there is evidence about done right, substance abuse prevention. There's pretty good evidence about the prevention of depression in adolescents. There is evidence about the prevention of the worst effects of first-break psychosis through early intervention. Interestingly enough, a very strongly community-oriented intervention done with following this knowledge. And then I just call your attention, and this is very much what Katie's been talking about this across the bottom. Policies make an enormous difference. Policies that are family-centered, policies that are family-friendly, community interventions make a huge difference. Welcoming. One of the great studies of resilience, Warren Smith on the islands of Hawaii, showed that as kids, as they enter adolescence, they're at high risk. If they have access to mentors, they do much better. If they have access to employment, they do much better. Those are community-level characteristics. And finally, there's lots and lots of good evidence about prevention focused on specific family adversities, bereavement, divorce, depression, substance abuse, and so on. So I think that's the broad scope of things. And then we developed an intervention called Family Talk, which basically came out of work on depression, which showed that families with a parent who was depressed didn't talk about what was happening, retreated to their corners, and weren't able to make sense of it. So the intervention tried to help families be able to have a conversation about depression and master it. We did long-term follow-up, not treatment, it was prevention. Core elements: assess the family, present psychoeducational material, resilience is possible. Resilience consists in being able to accomplish age-appropriate developmental tasks, relationships, and understanding. Kim mentioned those yesterday. We link that to the unique things that have happened in the family. Diminishing feelings of guilt and blame, and helping the family come to concrete steps to encourage resilience. And the family talk modules take a history, present the psychoeducation, and hear the family stories, see the kids, plan the family meeting, hold the family meeting, do a one-week follow-up to make sure that everybody's okay and nothing untoward has happened. Longer-term follow-up. And then in our new iteration, we've added an optional module, which is essentially for skills training, problem solving, relaxation, programs. And this guy has been at least 3 randomized trials, a very high ranking, completely objective in the National Rating of Effective Programs, 3.5 out of 4. So that's the core intervention. Again, old school, first studied the intervention, studied its evidence, and then moved to dissemination. We did a randomized trial of African-American families, showed similar effects in Dorchester. I wrote a book for families. We developed a program for single-parent Latino immigrant moms, delivering entirely in Spanish. We've done collaborations in Finland, Holland, Australia, Costa Rica, Rwanda, South Africa, Chile. I worked with Head Start. They came to me and asked me to try to think about an approach for depression with Head Start. We developed a teacher training empowerment program, Family Connection. We did work with Blackfeet Nation looking at its adaptation community. Project focuses the work with the military. The Chicago project was trained a large number of people in mental health centers in the south side of Chicago. I worked with the Urban Institute over 5 years trying to think about where the policy levers are to get to providing services for poor young mothers who are depressed with children. And again, they do not show up in the mental health system. They show up in food stamps, they show up in Head Start, and they may show up at their pediatrician's office. So that's where, that's where we should be thinking. All this training is available for free, www.fampod.org. And I'm going to talk a little bit about fampod.org. Then I'm going to talk about an exciting collaboration with the Department of Mental Health in Massachusetts, trying to adapt family court training to be used in in-home therapy, which is one of the key components of wraparound, which is what Gary was talking about. How do we stabilize our most vulnerable kids, keep them in the least restrictive settings, which are at home, and how do we draw resources. So, clearly I'm not handling this complicated device in exactly the way I expect. I think a central question about any kind of technological intervention is, what's the combination of live interaction and web-based training that's best, whether that's treatment or training? And similarly, how do we adapt programs divided from one setting or condition to another? I just say I developed interventions based on depression plus. So people have depression, but they also have medical illnesses, alcoholism, anxiety, many other things. Family-based, so spouses have many other conditions, but the minute you take this out into the field, if you find someone who's a parent who's struggling and doesn't have depression, you don't say, we don't do that because it's not depression. But that immediately means you have to think about adapting it to very different questions. But that's the adaptation and implementation. So what we did to develop the training, the web-based training for fampod.org, was work with the web developers that had done all the work with the National Trauma Express Network. We developed content teams, taking it page by page, with photographs, with video, and then we wrote scripts that went along with that. Then we did, voiceovers, integrated materials, and then we tested fampod.org. This is our home site, fampod.org, and you've got the family talk course, which I'll talk about in a minute. You've got introductory video. You've got across the top, you can see here, a whole bunch of things that says collaborations, et cetera, and resources. And if you want to go to the website and use it for free, all you have to do is pick a username and password. If you're a social worker and you go through this course, you get 4 hours of Category 1 credit from the National Academy of Social Work. We're in the process of doing the same thing for psychologists. And this is then the course. And so you go there, you can go through the training modules. We've got a manual that you can download or you can order. All the work I've done with the team, Jackie Martin and Tracy Gladstone are my collaborators in this. Tracy was pictured by Kim last night. And I would just say to you that, so as a sort of left-brain researcher, I actually had this conversation with my kids and my wife, because is it cheating if you're reading a book and you read ahead in it, as opposed to reading it in the way it comes? But I think you got to read the book, read ahead. So in the same way, I think about people that going through this. The first thing that happened when the web developers that we were working with on the space, she immediately went to look at the video. She didn't go through the course or anything else. People are going to do what they're going to do, which means everything you have has to be interesting and has to draw people in. It's not going to be done in a regular sequence. And if the videos aren't good, then you're lost. We haven't had very good videos. I don't believe in using videos of real families, because I don't think the kids can consent to have something shown about them 10 years later. Okay? Adults can do that. So we've always used actor family. And that's a lot of complicated stuff, but there's a team of actors and a director involved that does this very well. And we started with one 7-hour page of family talk, and then when we did the adaptation in Chicago, we did 2 African-American families doing African-American conveners, and we're developing new video for the in-home therapy. So this is our collaborators. And if you look across the top, you see home, about us, frequently asked questions, courses, collaborations, resources. This is the International collaboration, so we've collaborated extensively with CONPI. I'm on their international board. I've been to Australia twice, Finland, I've been probably 10 times. That's a program that Tudy Solange runs, and it's great. You can get all these manuals in your native language, you get pictures of people, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Chicago, Colombia, and many more on down the line. This is what the Module 5, the family meeting, which is the core of our work, looks like. So we kind of discuss the family's experience, how it's affected the family, how the families cope, and future plans for resilience. I would simply say, using the internet, the great advantage is people can use it 24/7 anywhere throughout the world. The disadvantage is you have no control over how people use it. So you have to be extremely careful not to do things that could be misinterpreted. You have to be very careful to build in protections for people who are suicidal. This is not a treatment. And so you have to work on that. And again, you can go through this in whatever sequence you want. And again, we think very much the concept of getting inside the world of the other, what was the mother's capacity to understand the world of the child, or vice versa, or the husband's capacity, or whatever. And so sharing individual perspectives is a part of the family meeting. We ask family members to share their individual experiences and how they're affected by it. As parents take the lead, we only do these family meetings after we've met with the parents until they feel ready to have these conversations. They feel ready to lead the meeting. And so we think that there's no one conversation that does it. Frequent conversations, new things come up. So that's why we think the future family meetings are really important. So then just a word about Family Connections. This is available on our website and from the Head Start website. It was an innovation technology, or not innovation grant from Head Start to develop a program to help parents and staff members deal with depression. We did it as parent groups and teacher groups with a curriculum, with a lot of sentence stems. Everything came from within the center. Module 1, Module 2, Module 3, Module 4. Just one comment about Module 1. We begin with the benefits and challenges of engaging parents. When we were doing this at our test site, which was a great site, Jamaica Plain in Boston, bilingual, bicultural site. So we began by a discussion of what is depression. And you know what? People left the room and never came back. They went to the bathroom. You can't start with depression. It's too tough. You start with something that's much more in the foreground, which is parents are difficult to engage. How do you do that? Or what do you do when a kid says something like, I saw my father hit my mother, and I don't know what to do. What do you do when a kid says something difficult? And so, again, in working this out with extensive piloting, we came to this very carefully articulated training program. We evaluated it for safety, feasibility, and initial effect with good results. We've now developed a second program, also available online, called Tell Me a Story, which is about reading books about powerful emotional content to classrooms, again, and very carefully studied. But I call attention to the fact that we wrote short papers for staff and short papers for parents. Any idea why that might be relevant? Because by far the most widely used thing from this whole program is the short paper. People go in and download the short papers, page and a half on fractions or resilience or whatever. And this is one I wrote, self-reflection in parents, help for getting through stressful times, keep track of what happens, recognize your place in the larger picture, plan for the future, being able to plan is essential, take a quiet moment, celebrate with your kids, keep a journal, exactly the same things that other people come to. All right, so then to set for adaptation of collaboration with the Department of Mental Health and South Mental Health Center to try to see whether the training in family talk can be useful to people doing interim therapy. South Mental Health Center founded in 1926 as a child guidance clinic, large regionally based mental health center, not surprisingly, it's south of Boston, the South Shore. Located in Quincy, services Boston, South Shore, Southeast Cape Cod, 55% community-based services, 45% clinical services. And this is the key. So 3 programs, Metro Boston, South Shore, Southeast, 125 clinicians, 500 active cases, African American, Asian, Cape Verdean, Latino, Asian Creole, intensive orientation and training, ongoing training and everything. So they train their folks in trauma-focused CBT, in Marshall Linehan, approaches, and a whole series of family approaches, trying to develop a family-based competence in these mental health centers. Ongoing review and assessment, supervision, consultation with child psychiatrists, and step-down capacity with mental health. I think that as we think about the dissemination of evidence-based practices, we should be thinking about how to build really strong care systems for families that are both clinical and community-based. And I would just make one observation. There are now studies that show that what goes on in supervision has more to do with whether kids get better than what goes on actually in interactions between clinicians and the clients. Now, they're not unrelated, but what it suggests is, and many of these clinicians are young, right out of training, many of them are VA level people, that you need to provide a structure for people to learn how to do things, and you need to provide support. So we did introduced the project, developed in-home therapy, met the managers, got funding, and then we did web-based training, live training, questionnaires and focus groups, 58 clinicians from South Shore, teams, about 2/3 of the masters, bachelors or pre-bachelors, 7% doctors. And then the findings are 89% would recommend family talk training, 74% felt prepared to use family talk after web-based training. They suggested more practice opportunities. We did this, in an interactive 6-hour thing, and they presented all these questions, like you go to the home to do in-home therapy, and the kid won't come to the meeting. Or you go to the home and there's 3 neighbors there. Or you go to the home and somebody's drunk. I mean, that's the things that they encounter. So that's where we have to develop content that links up to that, and we'll do that through cases and examples and so on and so forth. There's some technological changes we made. And it's also true, and this I think is true about, and I'll say more about this, but many people felt they could use elements of family talk without doing the whole family talk. So the way we do psychoeducation, which is teaching linked to the life experience of the family. Or the way we do family meetings, which is to say, plan it, talk to family members ahead of time, do it strategically, then do it until the family is ready, has broad meaning. And they thought if they'd gone through it on the web, they didn't need us to do anything didactically. They already got it. So now we're engaged in study 2, which is developing 2 new web-based modules and additional manual content for both applying family talk to situations other than the traditional one with parental depression, and then how it might fit in with IHP. And I think the really interesting thing, and this goes back to Gary's talk about serious emotional disturbance, is that so often in the CMHS care models, the child is identified with a serious emotional disturbance, but there are profound issues that the parents have of various sorts of trauma, diagnosis, and how one starts a conversation while both empowering the parents and dealing with that is really an essential key. And so we're developing new modules, we're evaluating them, we hope to train people in other centers, and use the principles in thinking about other evidence-based practices. Now I'm short of time, I won't leave time for questions. I will simply say that I've had this extraordinary opportunity to work with colleagues in the Navy developing programs for families facing multiple deployments. That's a program run by Tricia Lester and Lee Klaczynski. Kirsten worked with Bill Nash and Steve Kaza are from the military. It's a big program out of UCLA, now on 21 bases across the continental United States and the Pacific. And the key point is that we build interventions from Mary Jane Robert and Morris and Tricia Lester's interventions for families with HIV/AIDS, Bob Pinus and Bill Saltzman's intervention for families with trauma and from family talk. We partnered with the military. It's all strength-based, and we use the web extensively for screening, customization, and management and follow-up. And I'll just say a little bit about it. Again, innovative technologies played an absolutely key role, manual-based, evaluated, etc. This was the intervention, the core intervention that we came to. 5 skills: emotion regulation, problem solving, communication, goal setting, and management employment reminders, individual, family, and narrative timelines. If you think about multiple deployments, the narratives of the family are profoundly disrupted, and the person who is deployed is not in the family for typically a year, and not in the family for 2 or 3 times. So what happens, how the narratives go when people are there or not is very important. Giving voice to the child's experience, developing shared family meetings, bridging the strangeness of co-parenting. This has been just a graphic. We see the kids. We present to the parents what the kids have said, and then there are family sessions, which the parents lead, about addressing the kids' concerns, addressing how they're going to move forward. And Tricia would say that a lot of the narrative part comes from family talk. I'm honored that's true. I would say, having devised family talk, starting in 1988, that I don't think people should do interventions that anybody devised in 1988. We should be changing them and adding to them. We know a whole lot more, and that's what we try to do here, is to bring in the best and put it in. But the other thing about this, and this relates particularly to something Katie said, but particularly the military, which is they're very diverse geographically, and they move around, so that reaching through the internet has a particular appeal. And if you think about not just regular military, which is what the work we did on the basis, but Guard and Reserve, they're going to come from communities where they don't have a community support. Maybe the only one who's gone overseas and come back. And so the use of the internet has tremendous promise. This just gives you a sense of what we did from 2012, and I think the key, again, about 10,000 individuals in the core intervention, which really gave us a sense of what we needed to do, but then a whole bunch more interventions of less intensity. If you say to a family, you got to do 8 sessions forget about it. You've got to be able to deliver that content on their terms. If they say, I need a skill building group, you do a skill building. They say, we're going to be deployed next week and we want to concentrate. And I think this is not just about the military. It's just how we configure our interventions to families. Okay. And then again, this is our suite of services. It's essentially a graphic that displays what was there before. Now, one of the things that really played an enormous role here was a very extensive family web-based assessment that is both a self-assessment and an assessment for the clinician. So standard rating scales, depression, anxiety, what are your concerns, what are your concerns about the kids, rate scale about the kids, what do you want to help with? Families filled that out, they got some feedback. The clinicians could then tailor the interventions to that, and then we could use that same mechanism for evaluation, so that it's a very effective way to get evaluation. And this really surprised me. I work in the prevention of depression. These are people with scores in the clinical range on a depression measure cut in half by a simple, 7-session intervention that isn't focused on depression. It's focused on parenting. Okay, and again, anxiety, maybe not, well, just about the same. Maybe the service member is a little bit less, but again, about the same. And I'm not going to rehearse the data, but again, as you think about then, the question that I said before, we develop an intervention for one thing, let's say for depression, but then immediately you go into the field, you're going to be confronted with all kinds of other things, and at least with focus, the challenges presented by wounded warriors who had extensive physical injuries or extensive TBI, traumatic brain injury, or PTSD, focus for couples, that is couples who didn't have children, but we're trying to make sense of things. Focus for early childhood. When you're having family meetings, you're mostly dealing with kids who are old enough to talk. What about 2-year-olds? What about 3-year-olds? And then purple implementation is our consultation to summer camps for families who undergone multiple deployments. And then Focus World is essentially it's a website where you can go in, pick an avatar, and be part of a family and go through it. We use it as a reinforcement as people are going through focus training. We use it as a standalone, and it's proved very effective. And the innovative technologies in focus, family check-in, Focus World. We've developed a bunch of mobile apps, and then we've delivered focus remotely through the internet. And so this is Focus World, interactive, avatar-based environment. So there's one of the characters. Here are the different things that can go forward, and family members can do this together. They can do it individually, and it's really proved a powerful reinforcement. We've developed a mobile app, which again lets people get immediate reminders, feedback, and work on some of the issues. And then I think there's a large debate in the field about whether we should disseminate evidence-based interventions as a cookie cutter, exactly the way David Olds did in Ursula's dissertation to take the classic one, versus whether what we should be doing is disseminating principles that can be flexibly realized. I'm of the second school. I'm of the second school in part because of the enormous variability in cultures and in families that leads us to need to be able to adapt that. So I think that's the approach we're using. I think technology can play a key role in that. Although, again, if the technology is in English, it's not going to reach a lot of people. And if the technology is all sort of middle class, it's not going to reach a lot of people. So how we do technologies that are adapted, and then the technologies that work for parents may not work exactly the same way for kids. Again, so in terms of evidence-based practice, cultural competence, resiliency-based, strengthening parenting, orienting guiding frameworks are important, partnerships, equal partnerships with families, adequate infrastructure and support for the delivery of evidence-based interventions, and plans to disseminate a number of interventions, not one we should be thinking about, one intervention we should be thinking about. Our new work, and I ask you all to help us with that, is we're engaged in two projects. One is to develop an interactive parent portion directly for parents on Parental. And the other is we're very interested with this notion of parent navigators, parent advocates, as Gary was talking about with the Federation for Families. We're very interested in finding groups of parents who'd like to go through this training and see whether it would help them help other parents, and we're looking for partners to do that. And again, I think this work is always about values. This is from the King Memorial. We must come to see that the end we seek is a society at peace with itself, a society that can live with its conscience. Rob mentioned my involvement in the civil rights movement. I had the occasion of hearing Dr. King preach a number of times, meeting him, and so that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from. Thank you.